this is the problem with intros is I sit here and I think about like why should I do an intro? Does it mean anything? Does it matter? But then it's like, am I being fake? Like, am I just pretending? Well, you know what I should do is I should just be genuine. But then it's like, if I'm genuine, it's not going to be very interesting, or like people aren't going to care, or it's just, I don't know, like you got to make it a particular way, right? The solution is to just talk about the problem and get super meta about it, because this is a philosophy channel after all. So there you go. Now you've got an intro. Sweet. I have this drawing that I made real quick. And basically what it is it's things that we have as humans, and the different levels of, like, I don't want to say importance, because I don't think that someone's beliefs are necessarily more important than, like, say, their family or their friends. And so I don't think that's kind of like how they're organized. It's more so that, like, if you lose your family, there's always your well-being and your survival to fall back on as a way of, like, feeling good about yourself, right? Or not even like feeling good about yourself, but finding like reason to exist, right? So like when we start here in the center, this is kind of like physical things, or like interpersonal things that we have or interact with on a day-to-day basis. We have all this stuff that brings us purpose, right? Like gives us meaning. So let's say we just have someone walk through a thought experiment, right? And so we ask someone, like, what is meaningful to you in your life? And they'll probably be like, well, you know, my friends, my family, my hobby, my job, the things that I own, all these things are meaningful to me, and they drive me to, like, continue living because, you know, I enjoy having all these aspects of my life. It's like, okay, but like, why do these things make you feel good, right? So like we're asking like one level deeper, right? So like, why does having a family make you feel good? Why do having friends make you feel good? Well, because they contribute to my well-being, right? They contribute to my sense of community. They contribute to my sense of having like for instance, with a job, like having a purposeful lifestyle, right? And they provide, like they provide food, they provide shelter, they provide like the mental necessities to survive as a human in a way that's like healthy and meaningful. So like, okay, but like, why is that important? Why is it important that like your well-being is good? Or why is it important that like you're surviving? And at this point, going further, I think for a lot of people would be harder, because I think it's reasonable to expect that a person would say that, well, you know, surviving or being happy is meaning enough, and that's all I need. I don't need to look any deeper into like why this thing is meaningful, or like why I should survive as a human, or like why I should do anything in particular, right? It's just survival and feeling good is meaningful in and of itself, and I'm not gonna like deny that. But I think that for a lot of people, there's a lot of fear when moving from out of this box, right? I think that we get to this part pretty easily for most people. I don't think that there's, I mean, maybe if I could think about it more, I'd find it, but I don't think there's a lot of fear when moving from here to here. But when it comes from moving from here to here and really thinking about like, why is it meaningful that I survive? Or why is it meaningful that I do anything? Or why is it meaningful that I'm happy, right? Like, and you really start questioning that. I think that's when people, when elements of fear come into play, or at least like really strong emotions, right? And so I think that's where, it's one of the reasons that religion is so prominent in so many people, is because it provides, right? So like you can move from here to here, and you can feel fairly certain in some way, in some meaningful way for yourself, that there's like, that this is like supporting everything else, right? Because that's kind of what this is. Like all of this is supported by this is supported by this, and then, you know, and so on, right? So it's like different levels of support for like the meaning and purpose in your life. And so when we dig into this and we look and we kind of see that like, well, okay, like at the core, there's these beliefs that I have about reality. There's this kind of understanding about why things are meaningful, or like why happiness is meaningful, or like why I should continue surviving day in and day out. And these beliefs are usually closely tied with our emotions, in that changing these beliefs is usually pretty difficult for most people, and a lot of these beliefs are taken for granted or aren't often thought about, not because like people are stupid or whatever, but just because like we take for granted so many of the beliefs that we hold, that it's really hard to even like notice or recognize that those are beliefs and they're not like, you know, fact or something. And I think at this point, you know, we come like this, if you can get to this point honestly with yourself, and you can ask like, what are my beliefs? What are like the things that I feel are important? Like, why do I think that? And how are they meaningful to me? Like, this is like a super important part of like developing as a person, because it really grounds you in like the way that you see the world, the way that you like the actions that you take are informed by your own like introspection about like why you do things, or why you care about things, or why things are meaningful for you, right? I think that the step that is really hard for most people is jumping out of here. And I think that, well, let me just outline like what that looks like, right? So you have a bunch of beliefs, and some people have very, very strong beliefs, or they have a lot of, like I said, emotional ties to their beliefs. But once we ask the question why once more at this level, to go from this level to this level, you know, why is it that you value this thing? Or why is it that this kind of behavior or this kind of action or this kind of feeling is something that you push for, right? Why is it something that you place more value in than something else? And I think what is revealed is that it's really down to just like your preference, right? It's down to your preference, your experience, your kind of like understanding of reality. And what is revealed is that that understanding is necessarily flawed, right? No one has the answers. No one has the truth about what is happening. And so when we're here, this is pure uncertainty. This is like when you've broken down your beliefs all the way down to the bottom, and there's no bottom, right? It keeps going. There's layers and layers and layers underneath this. It's just reality is like a big catch-all term for what I'm talking about here. But you know, you have no firm grounds to stand on. And I think for a lot of people, this is terrifying. I think for a lot of people, I've noticed, and maybe this is obvious, but a lot of people are terrified of death. And a lot of people are terrified of not only this jump, of thinking about why they value things or why they should survive, but thinking about why they even value things at all, or like not even why, but like the fact that there is no defined meaning or defined structure of purpose within this reality. And that's just like a facet of the human experience, right? That's just a part of this like abstract, insane, what's the word for it? It's absurdism, right? Absurdism. That's kind of like what we're outlining here in this area, is that like there is no certainty for anything. And so you can't have any strong beliefs that are held up by an objective certainty, right? There's always some level of uncertainty to every belief that you hold. And so to tie this back into death, I think that when people look at the veil of death, when they look at and think about like what's going to happen afterwards, I don't even think that they think about it, right? I think that there are thoughts and some ideas and fantasies that occur when they try to go from here to here in regards to death. But I think that like the serious consideration about like the conundrum that humans are in is lost on many people. I think that they can't get to that point because the emotional reaction that they experience is so visceral. It's incredibly useful to be able to step back from one level to the next, I think it's almost like a necessary requirement to living a fulfilling life, because if you only stay at this level, right, where we could say like it's a very like materialistic level, kind of like hedonistic, where you are only living because things feel good and that's like the main driver of your kind of actions, then you're probably going to end up realizing that like things are not permanent and that things change, and because of that change you're going to be unhappy because you can never permanently have what you desire, right? Like you can't forever eat a candy bar and feel good about it. Eventually your brain is going to, you know, with the hedonic treadmill, you're going to adapt to that experience. It's no longer going to be as good as it was, and you're going to be back to a state of wanting more, but there's not an infinite amount to get. And so you're going to, if your desire is to have ultimate pleasure, you're going to be you're going to run into problems, is what I'm trying to say. But then let's say like, you know, well-being and survival, let's say like someone just wants to survive, someone just wants to be happy. Well, that's never going to happen, right? You're never going to always be happy. Your state of mind is dependent on so many things that you can't control. And even if you could control everything, it's just not how our brains work, right? It's not how humans work. Like you will always have your ups and downs through your life. And then also with survival, you're going to die one day, right? You can't live forever. And so there's always going to be the reality that you can't rely on survival as the purpose of life, because if that's the purpose of life, then everyone who has ever lived has failed that purpose. So then we jump back to here. And I think here, most people will end up resting here and stopping here. And this is where most people will be like, well, okay, you know, maybe they're like uncertain in their beliefs in a way, but they hold a lot of emotional weight and a lot of like certainty in these beliefs, because it provides them with relief. I think in a lot of cases, relief, a sense that like there is some kind of like reason to be here, the things that I do are meaningful, the people that I love are real, they exist, they experience things that are fundamental and meaningful, and that's like something that is worth living for. But the problem is, right, is that if we seriously want to consider what is coming for us behind the veil of death, or for instance, what the ultimate cost of being human really is, or like what is actually genuinely meaningful, or where does meaning come from, or like is it true that there are good and bad things in the world, or is it all kind of just a wash and everything is like whatever we think it is? You know, if we want answers to these questions, if we want to be honest with ourselves, because I don't think that you can exist in this space honestly. I don't think that you can, right? Because this area is necessarily uncertain. There is no certainty. There's no mechanism that we have as humans that gives us a sense of objective certainty about anything. I mean, there's one exception to this rule, and that's the fact that we exist, right? It is objectively true that we exist. If you can hear these words, if you can experience me talking right now, then it's objectively true that you exist, right? There's no way to deny that. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to have this experience at all, right? So that's true. You at least exist in some maybe solipsistic reality, but you exist, right? You can't break that truth. But every other truth is informed by evidence of the world that we experience, right? Everything from our identity, from our sense of self, to the objects that we interact with, right? Like, you know, like let's say it's a fact that the sun comes up every morning and goes down every night. Now that's a fact in the way that we generally describe it, right? But the reality is that we don't have the ability to know with 100% certainty the sun is going to rise and the sun is going to set. There's always the possibility that we grew up our entire lives being lied to by aliens who are controlling our reality in our mind and making us think that the sun is going to come up and go down, right? There's always some other possibility that something else is occurring. And so nothing within this area is certain. And that's the problem, right? So like if we, because at this level, we're relying on it to provide us with comfort, to provide us with a sense of meaning, to provide us with a sense of purpose. But we can't be honest with ourselves if we do that, right? I think that like, it sucks to be able to, it sucks to say that, because it means that like, well, it makes the implication that anyone who's like strongly religious or like has strong beliefs about anything is dishonest with themselves. But it's simply the way that our reality works, right? And it's ironic because these are all beliefs that I have, right? And so in a way, I am stuck in here, right? Like this belief that like there's only one truth, and that's that experience exists and that everything else is uncertain. That's still a belief. And so in a lot of ways, I am still stuck in the belief / epistemic grounds. Fuck this word, dude. It's not epistemic grounds. It's like the metaphysical fabric that we exist within. You know, like it's impossible to get out of it in a lot of ways because like the language that we use, the sense of self that we have, the reason that we do anything at all is informed by uncertain mechanisms, right? They're mechanisms that operate within imperfect prediction systems. What I'm trying to say is that every aspect of reality is evidence of something, but is not certainty of something, right? So let's take like a perspective that's not human, even though like, you know, there's a whole bunch of philosophy here that we're kind of like jumping over, but let's just say that like we can imagine like a wood pole supporting like a roof, right? So it's just like a support structure, and it's a stick supporting some roof, right? The roof is experiencing evidence that the stick exists and that the stick is supporting it, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that the stick is there or that the stick is supporting it, right? This is how all of reality works, right? So the roof is operating as though the stick is there because there is enough evidence, there is enough there are enough interactions that make it seem as though the stick is there to, in reality, cause that effect on the world, right? Now, obviously, from like a human perspective, the stick is there, right? Like we would say like there is so much overwhelming evidence, like 99.999%. If a roof is like hanging and being supported by a stick, then the stick is fucking there, right? But it's not certain that the stick is there, right? There are still other possibilities at play. And so that's kind of what I'm pointing out here, is that like there is no certainty in every mechanism of reality, right? Like everything is interacting with one another through this through this behavior of evidence, right? And so if there is some evidence of something, then you're going to have some other effect in reality, but that evidence doesn't always imply what we would assume it to mean, right? Like obviously objects without like without the ability to like intellectualize or to like or to imagine what is actually there don't experience the sense of like, oh, it's a stick here, so I'm going to do this, right? I mean, maybe they do. I don't have any evidence that they do or don't, but the evidence, enough evidence makes something, it outlines something in reality and causes things to happen because there's enough evidence that it's there, or that it interacts in a particular way, or it does something, right? And so I think, you know, to kind of tie everything back, when we accept that uncertainty, when we accept that there is no looking past the veil of death, when we accept that there's no looking past the veil of our own experience, when we accept that there's no like grasping the reality of our situation, the reality of what's happening, there are no answers. There are no certain answers. There are none. It's not possible. We don't have the capacity to hold those certain answers in our head, except for, of course, the reality that we exist. And so I think that for a lot of people, like when they think about it, not in this kind of like intellectual like way that I'm doing it, but when they feel it, when they think about it, when they're confronted with that reality, that there is no certainty to anything that they do, and everything that they do is essentially meaningless, because without certainty, meaning is whatever we believe it to be, right? Which makes things meaningful, and that is significant and meaningful, but it's not predicated by anything that is firm or strong, right? You can always ask one more why and always find some other answer that has another why to be asked. And that is kind of horrifying, right? Because if the world is as tangible and as meaningful as it seems to be to us, and yet there is no certainty for any of it. I don't know. I think that is kind of unnerving for a lot of people. I think the way that we overcome that fear is accepting that, right? It's using the evidence that we have to the best of our ability and disregarding everything else, right? So it's like, you know, I have evidence that doing these things are meaningful to me because and when I say meaningful, they're meaningful by the facet that I find them meaningful, right? I have some ability to choose what I do in a way that affects reality, in a way that I perceive it as choosing. And with those choices, I can direct myself towards things that I experience that I would rather experience than other things, right? And that by that metric, it's meaningful to me, right? But that meaning has no certain purpose, and it has no foundation that gives it any more legitimacy than any other belief or meaning for any other person, right? Now, obviously, like within a higher level, like up here, right? We can say that like my meaning of drinking water every day to survive is more meaningful than the meaning of not drinking every day, right? Because but that's predicated on this, like on these beliefs that like surviving is a good thing, or that like, you know, staying hydrated is a good thing, right? Those are both beliefs that then we can break down all the way down to reality, and reality is determined to be uncertain. There is no certainty at the grounds of reality. So I think I've gotten my point across. This is more of like I think just kind of a thinking exercise for me to organize my thoughts, but maybe someone else is watching this and